name for the members of the jury?
My name is Jamie Lorian.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Lorian?
Well, for the past 5 years, I've been the owner and chief auditor of my company, Raylord Strategies. We're a consulting firm. Our job is basically to investigate the investigators. We ensure that police agencies are following proper undercover protocol to ensure the integrity of an investigation.
And can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Well, for 25 years, I was a senior agent in the white-collar crime division of the FBI, where I conducted and supervised hundreds of undercover operations. I also later helped implement the Attorney General's guidelines for undercover operations, and I testified before Congress in that same capacity.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about your educational background as well?
Well, I received my bachelor's in applied mathematics and statistics from Johns Hopkins University. I received my Juris Doctorate from the University of Virginia School of Law, and I received my master's in law from Harvard Law School.
And have you ever been published in your field?
Yes, I've published 15 law review articles, the most relevant to today's proceedings being on cognitive biases in forensic settings.
And why are you here today, Miss Lorian?
My company was asked by Defense Counsel in May of 2015 to look into the evidentiary procedures used by the MSPD in the arrest and prosecution of Chase Covington.
And was your company compensated for its work today?
As per our standard rate, my company received $500 an hour for our time and expertise, as well as a standard additional fee for testifying today.
And you mentioned before that you were asked to evaluate the evidentiary procedures of the Midland State Police Department. Before this investigation, were you aware of the procedures that were in use by the Midland State Police Department?
I was very familiar with the procedures used by the MSPD because in 2014 they requested that my company perform an audit on the procedures that they used.
And what additional documents or evidence did you rely upon when you came to your conclusions?
I reviewed the affidavit of the undercover officer operating under the alias of Mickey Keenan, the informant Corey Hyde, email correspondence between Corey Hyde and Mickey Keenan, as well as the principal targets of the investigation, Chase Covington and Avery Bancroft. And I also reviewed the forensic report of the MSPD's forensic investigator, Dr. Pat Sikorsky.
And would you say you had sufficient evidence and data to come to all your conclusions today?
Yes, I did.
All right, now I want to talk to you a little bit about the analyses that were performed by Dr. Pat Sikorsky. Can you first tell us a little bit about what a forensic investigator does?
Well, a forensic investigator collects physical evidence from an investigation, and using a variety of scientific techniques, they attempt to glean information to try to aid in the investigation. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. A successful investigation seeks out corroborating evidence, such as statements and other documented evidence, to find out what really happened in a crime.
And are these forensic analyses always reliable?
Well, let's put it this way. The forensic analysis you see in CSI isn't what happens in real life, where the analyst always seems to find the perfect piece of evidence to convict a target. The reliability of forensic analysis can be determined using the TEA method. We consider the techniques used in analyzing a piece of evidence, the actual evidence used in the analysis, and the appropriateness of the conclusions made by the analyst based on his or her findings.
Now I want to get back to those techniques that were used by Dr. Sikorsky. What did you find in regards to Dr. Sikorsky's use of light microscopy in the analysis of hairs that were found inside the briefcase?
Well, to put it simply, light microscopy isn't a reliable forensic analysis. The National Research Council has actually said that it has no scientific support and no uniform standards to support using it to positively identify a suspect. It may hold some utility in ruling out a suspect, though. For that latter point, Dr. Sikorsky used light microscopy to determine that the hairs found inside of the briefcase didn't belong to Chase Covington.
All right, I want to move on to the use of mitochondrial DNA analysis by Dr. Sikorsky. What did you find in regards to this technique?
Well, while DNA analysis is more reliable than techniques such as light microscopy, it certainly isn't infallible. Recent advances in the scientific community have made it possible for smaller samples to be used to extract DNA from, which can cause some problems.
What do you mean this could cause problems?
Well, humans shed thousands of skin cells every single day, and these skin cells they contain DNA. So if a person touches an object, it's more likely that their DNA has been left on which makes the likelihood of a false positive to be developed. Like, a forensic analyst will claim that if a person's DNA is found on an object, they were involved in a crime, whereas they could have just come into contact with the object that was involved in the crime.
Okay, let's move on to their use of fingerprint analysis on the briefcase. What did you find in regards to this technique?
Well, like the hair analysis, a fingerprint analysis is a comparative analysis, meaning a forensic analyst will compare two samples to see if they are a match. Because ultimately the analyst is making their conclusions on each point match, it's possible that unconscious bias can play a role in fingerprint analysis.
How much of a role could this possibly play in fingerprint analysis?
Well, in one study, when criminalists were asked to reevaluate a piece of evidence that they had evaluated earlier in their career, they reversed their initial conclusions about 20% of the time.
And did you find that this played a role in Dr. Sikorsky's analysis?
I didn't have any evidence that
Objection, Your Honor. They have now laid proper foundation to show that she has that J.D. Warren has the ability to talk about scientific methods used by Pat Sikorsky.
Response?
Your Honor, according to Rule 702, we have laid proper foundation that she is an expert in her field and that she is qualified to consult on the techniques that were used by Dr. Sikorsky, even though she cannot scientifically verify their analysis. She studied these techniques and the role that unconscious bias and things like that can possibly play. Therefore, she is qualified to make this testimony.
She is not, the proper foundation for her being an expert in undercover operations has not been laid because they have not talked about the methods and principles. And to expand upon that, she went to school for, I'm sorry, Your Honor, she went to school for, I apologize, Your Honor, it was, applied mathematics and statistics, as well as a doctrine. She has not went to school for anything that Pat Sikorsky has.
Any response to that?
Dr. Sikorsky has stated that she's been involved in several operations and she's qualified to testify as to the procedures that are used, although not the scientific data that they used in their conclusions.
I tend to agree with defense counsel. I think that those are excellent points to make on cross-examination, and you'll have a chance to challenge this witness's credibility.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Overruled.
And were you finished with your answer?
Could you repeat your question?
Did you have any evidence that these sort of problems played a role in Dr. Sikorsky's analysis?
I didn't have any evidence that Dr. Sikorsky had fallen victim to unconscious bias, but the evidentiary procedures used by the MSPD did bring up two additional concerns.
And what was your first concern?
Well, my first concern is that there was no documented evidence of this investigation, meaning that any confessions that a suspect might have made were not documented.
And what was your second concern?
Well, my second concern was a much bigger one. The MSPD did not provide me with any documentation that they had maintained a proper chain of custody in this case.
Dr. Lorgan, what do you mean by chain of custody?
Well, it's important to keep a proper chain of custody in a case like this because if we're not sure who handled the case, who handled the piece of evidence and when they handled this evidence, we can't be sure that it wasn't contaminated.
And what did you find regarding the chain of custody of this evidence?
Nothing. That's the problem. Without proper documentation of how and by whom a piece of evidence was collected, stored, handled, and eventually delivered to the lab, we can't be sure that the briefcase that Dr. Sikorsky tested in her lab is the same briefcase that Chase Covington was arrested with.
Thank you, Ms. Lorgan. No further questions.
Cross-examination from the state.
Yes, Your Honor.